This is the DarshanTalks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at DarshanTalks or the show's website at DarshanTalks.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to the DarshanTalks podcast. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. As you may remember, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. So if you work in or have an interest in an FDA-regulated company or its products, this is the podcast for you. So today's podcast, if you are doing anything in pharma, this is probably the podcast for you. If you're in health, this is the podcast for you. And the reason is we are working in an area where trust is required at a maximum. And I think pharma is rated at the bottom, like right next to tobacco, which is crazy to me because you're literally in the business of saving lives. So as a lawyer, I feel like we don't have any trust anyways. So it's interesting when the profession I work in has that same issue. If you are a CEO, if you are a C-suite executive, if you are in compliance, you should probably be thinking about trust. And that comes up in multiple facets. It comes up in the context of trust with your patients. It comes up in the context of trust with your healthcare provider. And it comes up in the context of trust with your employees. So what does that look like if you are an employee in one of these companies? Love to have you listen and get some more information from it. So today's guest is an author and is one of North America's leading experts on trust. She's been named top thought leaders on trust for 2017, 2018, and 2019 by the organization Trust Across America. She's also the author of Trust Me, Restore Belief and Belief and Confidence in an Uncertain World. Probably should include intelligence as well for us. But do you want to show the book?
Sure. There you go.
There you go. And Trusted: Secret Lessons from an Inspired Leader. She's a contributing author in 4 other books and continues to share her expertise in business magazines across the world. Globally recognized, you have worked in numerous industry sectors, specifically health and safety and education, and in numerous countries, including Canada, US, Europe, Singapore, Africa, and Indonesia. You've developed training programs and workshops that focus on more productive and profitable workspaces through leadership strategies that increase efficiency in communication and trust. So, ladies and gentlemen, our guest for today, Lea Brovedani. Is that pronounced properly?
You're pretty close. I go Lea Brovedani. So, and you know what? If you say Brovedani and you use your hand, it's easier to pronounce. So.
It's very Italian. I love that.
My husband is Italian, and he always says, you say Brovedani. Exactly.
I love it. Christine's already saying hi. She actually just posted something about building trust in clinical research. So this is very, very timely.
Hi, Christine.
Hey, Christine. So let's start with a really basic question. How did you get involved in trust?
I don't know if there's ever a straight route to anything. So I was doing my practicum in adult education, and at the time I was an HR manager for a call center, but I didn't want to do anything I decided that I'd give back to my children's school. And I started reading Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ, and decided that I would write a program for my children's school at the time, because as I read it, I could see that a lot of the problems that the teachers had more to do with their emotional intelligence than it did with their skill around teaching. So I did my practicum around teaching teachers how to use emotional intelligence in their schools. And then I really, I ended up hosting a conference in Halifax, which is where I was living at the time, Halifax, Nova Scotia, and brought in the top leaders of emotional intelligence. So people like Peter Salovey, who's the Dean of Yale University, Martin Seligman, who does all of the work around positive psychology, Josh Friedman, who's head of the largest emotional intelligence network in the world. So I could go on and on. It was just this amazing lineup of thought leaders in emotional intelligence from around the world. So, as soon as you get connected with these amazing people, then you're given a lot more resources. And what I found was, as I delved more and more into emotional intelligence, I could see that a lot of what happened as people got more involved with emotional intelligence is they actually became more trusted as well. So it kind of twinged me, whatever. And I decided
there you go.
I decided to start researching trust. And then, it kind of took this off ramp, but I still see a lot of how well people are trusted through the lens of emotional intelligence. There's a lot more involved in it, but definitely you'll probably see with my model, I talk about my 5 tenets of trust, which are caring, commitment, consistency, competence, and communication. But caring is a large part of how much we trust and are trusted. So, that's an emotional intelligence component. So that might be a little different from some of my colleagues, although I always find that there is a little bit of an emotional intelligence component to how we are trusted.
It's funny, you talk about the 5 elements of trust, and you
right.
talk about the 5 C's, if you will. And the only thought that went through my mind as you were saying this is, and Kim Kardashian, because that would have just, it's the other pieces that have to go in there. But no, I love it. I love the fact that you're talking about how these elements come together. I love the fact that EQ, emotional quotient, emotional intelligence, feeds into this. Can you talk a little bit more about how that feeds in? I mean, you hinted at it, but I'd love to sort of get a feel for are emotionally intelligent individuals necessarily more trustworthy then?
Yeah, they are. And so some of that work comes through the work that I've done with 6 Seconds, and they use an assessment tool, which the SAY, which 6 Seconds Emotional Intelligence, and then they also have an assessment, a 360 climate survey that goes through a lot of emotional intelligence components, but it relates to how people are trusted. And they found a correlation between emotional intelligence and trust. So, it seems like the higher your emotional intelligence is, the better your trust abilities are. So when you think, if I walk into a pharmacy and I'm talking to somebody, or if I'm in a doctor's office, and I see some examples of them caring about me, and that can be that when I'm talking, they're not interrupting. Something as simple as that. It can be they're listening to me intently, and they're actually repeating some of the things that I've said to them. That's an example of communication and caring. And you'll see that when they're telling me how they're going to help me, I'll be more inclined to trust them, because there is that component of care and communication.
No, that was great, actually. So I have 3 of them so far, because I didn't want to interrupt you. You said caring, commitment, communication. What are the other 2 again?
Caring, commitment, consistency.
Consistency.
And competence.
Ah.
Yeah, so like if I'm in the hospital and I have broken my leg and someone tells me that the best surgeon is a complete jerk, but he is brilliant, I'm probably going to put a lot more emphasis on his competence, and I'm going to trust him because of that competence. But for my long-term care, I'm going to want to see all of them. So, there was this fallacy that emotional intelligence was more important than intelligence, and it's just not true. But all things being equal, when you get into a field, and let's say, like in pharmacy, you have to be really bright in order to graduate and have that degree.
Yeah.
So there is a benchmark. So all of the people who are pharmacists have gone through that benchmark of competency. But then once they have proven their competence, and that's part of the education, then what determines whether or not I trust them, emotional intelligence, enters into the picture.
So it's an add-on, if you will. It's the
add-on, absolutely. Or that's how I see it. So
sure, absolutely. Which really raises by the way, first of all, before we go into this, Christine wants to find out how to read your book. So first of all, Christine, we're going to have a giveaway at the end, so you might be able to enter for that. But where else can she find your book in case she doesn't make the giveaway?
Amazon.com. Just, go on Amazon.com and just punch in "Trust Me," and that's the cover, so you'll know what it is. And you can buy it on Amazon. But I will give one away, and it'll be autographed, and I'll send it to you wherever you are in the world. So at the end of the show, we'll figure that out.
There you go. And she already wants to become best friends with you. So
Perfect.
she wants to connect with you on LinkedIn. So let's ask another question, by the way. So you talked about how in the case of professionals, pharmacists, doctors, whoever, there's a certain amount of competence you're required to have.
Right.
And then that emotional quotient, as it gets improved, contributes towards trust.
Absolutely.
How does that translate in the case of products where the entire pharmaceutical industry in general is not trusted? Why, on what basis would one product be more trusted than another?
So much of reputation gets involved in how we trust too. So, and we've, like you spoke about Trust Across America, and I'm affiliated or associated with them. It's an organization I believe in, and Barbara Brooks Kimmel is brilliant, and she's created this. And we've talked about what's the difference between reputation and trust. And reputation, a lot of it is based on your behavior, and so it is very much your reputation is built on all of the things that you do. Now, I've said, and I know my colleagues and I've had different opinions on this, I think that trust is forward thinking. So trust is based on positive expectations because you believe that someone's going to do something, like they say they're going to do. So really the positive expectations, where reputation is based on kind of a backward look at things that you've already done. And that's how, part of how I see it. So in the pharmaceutical industry, a lot of times they're looking at your reputation.
Yeah.
And it's things that they've already done. So, we talked about this just before we went on air, that someone had posted on LinkedIn that the only thing that you need to do in order to be trusted is to tell the truth. And if that were true, then number 45 would never have been trusted because they stacked up over 30,000 lies over the course of the 4 years. So it's, I see it very differently. Telling the truth is a component of trust. And I certainly don't believe that you should ever lie. I believe telling the truth. But you have to understand, what's the difference between a fact, an opinion, or a belief as far as the truth? So from my perspective, and you talked about Blockcoin,
Bitcoin and blockchain.
Bitcoin. And that's based on the facts. Here's the facts. And so we can trust it because, there's no opinion or belief that enters into it. So it's all based on facts. It's easier to tell what is the truth. But so often I've heard people say things like, well, I'm just telling them the truth. But when you really look at it, they're not. They're giving you an opinion. Yeah. So the difference, if I were to say, since as of 2013, I think there was 297, and don't quote me on the number, of astronauts around the world. And out of that, 49 were women. Mm-hmm. So you could check and you could see that is a fact, and it's on the NASA site. But there's people who would say, well, the truth is that women were discriminated against. No, that's an opinion. You would have to check all through the years and show what everyone believed in order for that to be the truth. So it's an opinion. And a belief might be women are not meant to go into space because we're the inferior sex, which is a really stupid.
Yeah, I was like, wait, this rubs me a little wrong, but okay.
So, like when someone says something, is it a fact, an opinion, or is it a belief? So that's why I don't, I've had people say, well, why don't you have truth as part of your, as part of your trust model? And it's because it's really hard to discern, is it a fact, an opinion, or a belief? And it gets muddied. So
Christine has a clarification. Before that, I do want to say that Barbara is listening in, and
Barbara.
She has agreed to finally add the word brilliant to her resume.
Yeah, I think she should. So, my opinion.
I'm gonna have to agree with you for sure. So the quote you said, "Reputation is not." I don't remember that quote. I thought.
Well, Christine, this is my opinion, that I think reputation is different than trust. So reputation is a backward glance.
Okay,
of the behavior that someone's already exhibited. So again, you're getting my opinion. So that if you look up reputation, I can tell you that when we've had great discussions on Trust Across America, there was a difference of opinion on what reputation and trust were. Like, we all had different opinions on it, or I saw that.
So here's a topic that comes up often in our industry. It's this idea that clinical research is problematic, and it's had its ups and downs throughout. One of the most famous ones, have you ever heard of the Tuskegee trials by any chance?
I haven't heard of the trials. I've heard of the Tuskegee
experiments.
Some of the people that have flown and were just one of the most amazing pilots.
The Tuskegee Airmen.
Yeah, like I've heard all about them, but not about the trials. What were the trials?
So essentially what happened is a lot of those people who were part of those Tuskegee Airmen and people in that area, the big issue they had was people started doing experiments on them. The government started doing experiments on them, didn't even tell them that they were part of these trials, and literally continued for I want to say decades afterwards. And again, don't quote me, it's been a few days, months since I looked at this, but I think they were looking at the development of syphilis, and they were just like, I don't know what happens, so let's find out, and we just won't tell them that they're part of it. And the result of that, obviously, was that the African American community, which was what a lot of these people were, obviously started losing trust in the government, in pharma, in research.
Oh, no.
And the idea is that, first of all, I think that's the point Christine's making, where pharma, in this case, it wasn't pharma, it was the government itself. But still, the point being, people don't trust research because of these types of bad events. There was another similar one where it was a pharma company that was doing some research in Africa, and the question was, did they get appropriate, quote unquote, informed consent, and what are the implications of that? So I guess it really brings the question in: how do you engage in a way that goes to trust? And I think you and when you're doing this type of clinical research, I mean, you talk about caring. One would argue that if you're doing clinical research to bring treatments to people, that should be caring. But I think you're talking about it in a very different way. You're talking about a one-on-one relationship, as opposed to this conceptual I care ethos.
Yeah, but part of it, I think you have to be able to admit mistakes too. And so if you try and cover them up, it's just going to make it a lot worse.
Yes.
So the best leaders that I've interviewed are leaders that will admit mistakes, and they'll admit them fairly quickly. Now, there's always a bit of a dance that you do, because you have to see, if the company is making the same mistake over and over and over again, and you have people who are constantly apologizing, that's a different situation. Then that's going towards incompetence, and that's something that people can't trust. But if you make a mistake and you come clean and you admit it and you say, here's what I learned from it, and here's how we're going to go forward and not make that mistake again, it's a completely different scenario. So
I guess the question is, if you make a mistake, who's the we?
The company, the representative, yeah.
But I want to take that a step further. In this case, it's the industry, because different CEOs keep making different mistakes. and they all chip away at trust. And how do you fix something that you may not even have caused?
Well, man, if I was, so I'm just going to give you what I think you could do. But if I could, honestly, Darshan, if I could come up with how to fix all of that, I'd be making a lot more. So I really think that you still have to come clean and say, in the past, these are the mistakes that the industry has made.
Yeah.
And here's what we've learned from them.
Yeah.
And then it has to be transparency and authenticity. You can't say, I'm never going to make another mistake. But you can say, here's what I've learned from the mistakes of others. So we're definitely not going to make those. And if we make a mistake, then I expect to be told about it and we'll correct it as soon as possible. So there has to be that honesty and that transparency in order to be trusted. I mean, Barbara and I have had some great conversations about how industry leaders don't, they don't come clean and they don't tell the truth. Yeah. And that, it makes it really hard for others to trust, especially if people feel like they're hiding something.
Yeah. It's funny. I've had numerous conversations with Barbara, and she's incredibly generous with her time with me. So I appreciate it. Thank you, Barbara. But the part that's always come out, and I apologize, Barbara, for calling you out a little bit on this, where I always go, we want to develop trust, and she goes, trust in what? There's so many different angles to this, and you're just sort of hitting such a wide net. You're gonna have to address different issues differently. And I think that's part of the problem. There's clinical research which has a lot of these problematic issues that Christine, for example, is pointing out. There's advertising and promotion where people think that pharma is trying to make its next buck and therefore charge an immense amount of money. Yeah. And as a result, these drugs cost so much. And whether or not it's justified, the fact is that the truth isn't the part that's relevant. There may be factual parts that are relevant, but the opinion is also what matters. So I'm sort of processing and listening to some of the really cool things you're pointing out. Let me ask you another question. I know I agreed to keep you only for 15 to 20 minutes, and we're already past that because you're just a good conversationalist. Before we go out, I do like to do this rapid fire list of questions. Would you be down for that?
Yeah, okay. Sure.
What is an accomplishment you're most proud of?
Okay, I'm going to be the corny mother and say my kids.
That's not a bad accomplishment at all. That's pretty good.
Yeah, they're pretty good kids.
Who is your hero or heroine and why?
There's a woman from Nova Scotia who passed away quite a few years ago. Her name was Ruth Goldblum, and she was this tiny little lady from a small fishing village, and she got the Order of Canada, and Ruth had personality plus, but when someone asked her to do something, she was able to see people for what they were, and it didn't matter if you were the prime minister or the president or whatever. If Ruth wanted to talk to you, she got through to you and she talked to you, and she was someone who got shit done.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What is your favorite way of giving back to the community?
Since we've been in this little bubble, I'm going to bring it down to a very neighborly.
Sure.
I bake. And so just in the last little while, I've found that I can cheer up people on my street because I love to bake. So I make bread and pies and cakes and cookies, and I distribute them. So it's just a small thing. And on a bigger thing, it would be giving my time to people, as far as helping them understand what trust is. So
and coming on this podcast. So thank you. How do you define success?
There's so many. When I was younger, I used to define it as how successful, like how much I put in the bank account, and that was it. And now it is the positive influence that I can make, and the legacy that I'm at a point in my life where I think it's really important to figure out what is the legacy I want to leave. So success will be leaving a legacy of love.
I love it. What challenges you?
Whew. Keeping on top of what I want to do, just all of the technology, that's just a really practical challenge. And then sometimes just maneuvering through personal relationships that mean a lot. I mean, I've got children, and sometimes the relationships that I have with my kids are the ones that challenge me the most. And I think it's because I love them so much that when there is a problem there, it keeps me up.
You're emotionally invested. I love it.
Yeah.
What is your favorite movie?
Oh, Flight of the Wilderpeople. So it's a little movie out of New Zealand.
Oh.
And
okay.
It is such a good story, and it makes me feel good, and I can watch it every time people come over. And we have a big movie screen in our backyard, so we can have people over and watch movies outside. And if they haven't seen it, it's one of the first movies we show people.
Oh, that is so cool.
People,
I'm a huge movie buff for that. I've never heard of that one. What is the most fun you've had recently?
We have an outdoor fire pit too, so having people over, and when we watched the number 46 get elected, and we were, hooting and hollering and opening champagne and just having fun, and obviously you're listening to my political beliefs, which I usually don't talk about, but that was fun, just celebrating.
Okay. We aren't talking about the political beliefs. I just think you're an amazing person to talk to us. By the way, we already have Olivia Green. She's talking on medical affairs and how little people know about how drug companies market and sell products. If they did, researchers could be more influential in corporate and help make changes from the inside. So I will say, Lee, you've had a lot of people actually talking in, and this has been super, super fun. I have a couple more questions. If you were a superhero, what would your powers be?
Oh, flying. Definitely flying.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
If you won $1 million, what would you buy?
I'd divide it up. Part of it would go towards our home. Like, we bought land in Nova Scotia, which is where we'll retire. And then I would make sure that my kids were taken care of. And then I would, there's a few charities that I believe in. So
okay,
I would do that.
This one is a new one that I sort of modified based on a comment we had yesterday. If you were going to build a new 2020 Mount Rushmore, who would be the first person on it?
Well, since it has to be an American, and so I think that there needs to be a woman who balances that out. And so I would say Ruth.
Ruth's coming on there again.
Yeah, I would say.
I love it. But I thought you said she's in Nova Scotia.
No, Ruth Goldblum is in Nova Scotia, but
right.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg is.
Oh, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I missed the
RBG. Yeah.
RBG, got it. And last question. What makes you happy?
I think I'm a pretty happy person. Like my husband, I'm blessed with having a really good marriage, and we are happy together. I never ascribe to the thing that what makes me happy. I think that there's a lot of things that I can look at that I get happiness from. So nature, walking, exercise, my good health, my husband, my kids, my dogs, my friends, my music.
You're generally just a happy person. That's awesome. So one last question that we want to ask. I believe you're giving that book away, a signed copy of the book away, as a giveaway. Right. But in exchange, you're going to actually pick the right answer to a question you're going to pose. What is a question you'd like to pose to people?
What is the one thing that you do that you feel builds trust with others?
Ooh, I like that. And if you put it into the LinkedIn, or if you go to my LinkedIn and you post the answer there, Lee will get a copy of it so that she can choose the right answer for her. And we'll reach out to you and we'll let you know who the winner is. And you can send us your address and Lee will send that book over to you.
Perfect.
So, again, based on our discussion, we talked a little bit about the how your journey into trust via emotional intelligence. The 5 pillars of trust, if you will. We talked about reputation and trust. We discussed forward thinking versus looking back, if you will. And we talked a little bit about both research and we talked about marketing and how leaders can be better at gaining trust. I remember when we started, I really wanted to get more into employee-employer trust, which was initially when we discussed the sweet point, but you were just brilliant at all these elements as well. So thank you for that. As we discussed before, those of you who missed it, Lee, where can they find you again?
So my website is leabrovedani.com, and Lee is Lea, and Brovedani is Brovedani. So you can go to my website, check with me on LinkedIn, or my Facebook page is The Trust Architect, or Twitter or Instagram. I'm sure I'm missing a few things, but if you reach out to me, I'll write you back, I promise.
Awesome. And if you like this podcast, please leave a comment, respond to Lee. Please subscribe. You can find me on at DarshanTalks on Twitter, or just go to our website at DarshanTalks.com. And Lea Brovedani, it was wonderful talking to you. And I hope you'll come back again.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Darshan, I just have to tell everybody,
Please.
He promised that he would wear his clown makeup, and he didn't.
Well, here we go.
There we go.
Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
This is the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at DarshanTalks or the show's website at DarshanTalks.com.